So good morning to you all. So let's try again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sani Bonani. Goeiemorgen. Yeah, I really hope I've accommodated as many of you as is possible. Oh, okay, sorry. So help me with the others. Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Okay, bonjour. Goeiedag. Tobela. Okay, I think that's enough now. It's okay. So good morning again, and thank you. It's really great to be here. Sorry that I could not join you last night. We had our very final Senate meeting for our outgoing Vice Chancellor, Professor Iron Rensburg. It was his last Senate meeting, followed by our own awards ceremony last night. Please don't tell them I said that, but I would have preferred to be much closer to the Vaal than the concrete jungle, but duty called, so I had to be there. I believe you had more than just intellectual stimulation last night. I believe it was quite a bash that I missed. So again, thanks. It's great to be here. I think you're doing fantastic work at this university, and what I like the most about it is you go about your work very quietly and seamlessly, building your own reputation, gravitas, and standing as a tertiary institution. So I wasn't given a specific topic to speak to, but let me try and do three things, just knowing some of the speakers that spoke before me, not in the least my erstwhile friend and colleague and somebody that I harbor tremendous respect for, Professor Sipamandla Zondi. You had him yesterday. Professor Jonathan Jansen. I recently hosted Prof. Jansen in Johannesburg at UJ, where we launched his book for him. It was quite a raucous launch because, you know, how many, do we have a lot of students in the room? Just a show of hands. Oh, that's fantastic. Because I just want to say that even though my title is Professor of Diplomacy, I should just warn you that I suffer from a disease, namely I'm very undiplomatic. And the reason why I ask whether there are students in the room is that during that launch of Professor Jansen, we had a situation where a lot of the students proceeded to, shall I say, criticize Prof, if not attacked him, without necessarily having read the book, and then found themselves making a lot of what we would call in diplomacy faux pas or mistakes, such as saying to him, what did he do when the rates incident happened? You know, that infamous incident where some of our cleaning staff were exposed to the indignity of even having to drink urine. And it turns out Professor Jansen wasn't the Vice Chancellor of the university at the time that it happened. You see how that conversation went. So when you accuse people falsely. So just on that note, I know we have a lot of the professoriate, academics, the unsung heroes from support staff. So what I'm going to try and do is do three things this morning. I will give you my own perspective on the much talked about issue of decolonized education. But then I want to go secondly a step further and place the emphasis on how do we build a cadence, a core of future academics, scholars, teachers, and of course people prepared for the world of work. What should the relationship between quote-unquote students and academics be in the second place? And then I will just spell out what I call thirdly just a few benchmarks for how we build a culture of excellence in the age of decolonization. Because, quite frankly, I think the debate is currently stuck at what is decolonization and whether we need decolonization. A question that's not even worth responding to, because there's no disputing that we need decolonization. But the main contribution that I would like to make this morning is on the second and the third aspects. How do we go beyond the debate about what constitutes decolonized education and put in place the building blocks of excellence in managing student academic, student supervisor, student teacher, student lecturer relationships. So I want to start by saying, and I know we've got very eminent representatives from the executives of universities here this morning. I want to start by saying, as we go to the tick boxes, and we're ticking the boxes as we try to climb the ladder, as VUT seeks to overtake the university ahead of itself at the moment, and UJ seeks to overtake Stellenbosch, for example. So, lots of emphasis on research excellence. Very glad to say that teaching and learning is beginning to enjoy pride of place and importance where it belongs. There's clearly an overemphasis on corporate management within universities and corporate excellence and running our universities even better than private sector companies. And of course, we need efficient and effective universities. Nobody can dispute that. But I want to suggest to you, there's an overemphasis on the corporate management of the university. I remain absolutely astonished, though, by how little emphasis is placed on the student and where the student fits in, and the relationship between the student and these different layers and stratas of the university. I wish to go further and say, I remain absolutely baffled by how the place of the student is almost an afterthought, is almost a footnote. But I want to make a prediction for you this morning, that once we get over this report that's leaked and not leaked about the Fees Commission, I think it's now official, right? I think President Zuma just quietly released it eventually, and it's now out there in the public domain. I'm not suggesting for one moment we're going to find silver bullet solutions to the question of fees and whether we will have fee-free tertiary education in the not too distant future. My guess is as good as yours on that score. But I want to make this prediction for you, that in the months, years, and certainly decade to come, the emphasis is going to shift away from free education. It's going to shift away from decolonized education, because we will have to simply settle on what we mean by decolonized education, and there will be as many perspectives as there will be people participating in that debate. And the real emphasis will be on the place of the student within the tertiary sector. Who are they? Where do they belong? What are their rights and responsibilities? And we're going to go beyond debates just about free education. So let me start with the first one and give you my perspective on decolonization. I'll start on a very controversial note and say, you cannot decolonize something that was not colonized before. it's logical that if you want to decolonize something, that thing had to be subjected to encroachment, colonization, overtaken by somebody else, hence the emphasis on decolonization. But I want to suggest this morning that the mistake that is being made out there is that oftentimes we confuse decolonization with recolonization. Let me be the first to say there may very well be a place for recolonizing something, taking over something that existed before by somebody else with something else. So let me give you a classic example. If there was an institute that promoted crude racist practices at any one tertiary institution, the case could be made for that place to be not decolonized, but recolonized. Somebody else goes in there and completely turn it on its head, and you replace it with something else. That is recolonization. But if we want to be serious about decolonization, then I suggest, and I'm sure Prof. Zondi, because he's really one of the authorities on this subject, that decolonization simply means you strip something that is dominant of its preeminence, of its hegemonic status, and you bring those that enjoyed a less than equitable share or status, you bring it on par with the one that was hegemonic. So let me be very clear, give you concrete examples. I do think we come from a history and a culture where Europe was regarded as the epicenter of knowledge of the world, of the universe. Everything European, culture, music, knowledge. Now, if you're going to be serious about decolonization, then you're not going to get rid of European education. What you are going to do, you're going to balance and bring on par with the dominance of European perspectives, also perspectives from other parts of the world. So you're going to elevate American perspectives, particularly South American perspectives. You're going to elevate Asian perspectives, and of course, the way China is so exuberant in the world, quietly exuberant. No, it sounds like a tautology, quietly exuberant. But everything, all roads seems to lead to Beijing with the one belt, one road that they're building. But you're certainly going to elevate, and I'm prepared to bet my bottom dollar that Zondi used the phrase locus of enunciation yesterday. All it means is you're certainly going to bring on par with European perspectives, with Asian perspectives, with South American perspectives, with perspectives from the Caribbean. You're certainly going to bring perspectives from the locus where you are located, where we are located. The Vaal Triangle, Gauteng, South Africa, Southern Africa, Africa. You're certainly going to bring African perspectives where we are located on par with the European. We're therefore going to, and I'm sure Zondi uses again, we're going to expose our students more to pluriversal world perspectives. This idea of a universal, one perspective on the world, one perspective on knowledge, one dominant idea. We're going to move away from that, and we're going to introduce plurality of views, perspectives, and ideas. Secondly, we're going to embrace, to use concepts that the chair of this morning and myself and our discipline use. You're going to embrace ideas of glocalization. Listen to that. So you've got globalization, you've got localization, and you're going to continuously to try to remain globally competitive, yet locally very relevant. So we're going to embrace global. We're going to bring the global and the local more together. More specifically from our discipline, Stembile, we're going to embrace intermestic perspectives. The international, the domestic, and we're going to bring the inter from international and domestic from domestic, and we're going to marry the true. We are the two. We are not an island, and we're going to learn to bring these worlds together. But if we are therefore serious about decolonization, we are going to decenter and de-hegemonize European perspectives. Because this idea that all we have to be taught from our discipline is Hobbes and Immanuel Kant and Aristotle and his roles of the tongue and Kissinger and Thucydides and Machiavelli, and we forget about Sheikh Anta Diop and Kwame Nkrumah and perspectives from Mamdani and Ali Mazrui and others, then we're making the point, because we have our own thought leaders from our parts of the world and from our disciplines. And let me speak something that's close to your university. Even something like engineering, don't let anybody tell you that no, maths is maths, science is science, engineering is engineering, and you can't really decolonize them. Instead of pampering us and peppering us with examples from European architecture, what about the Zimbabwe ruins as examples of architecture? Just to give an example. So we're going to move away from Western civilization as the epitome of civilization, and we're going to start to embrace our own. There's a fascinating debate going on at the moment about Pan-Africanism. And some of us are starting to toy with the idea, for example, of global Africa. So let me just share what's interesting about this notion of global Africanism as opposed to Pan-Africanism. So global Africanism suggests to you that people in the Caribbean that were just hard hit by Hurricane Irma, and which is the other one? There were two hurricanes. Irma and Maria, right? Irma, so we refer to them as Irma Maria, right? Devastated those Caribbean islands. But you know what the people from the Caribbean are saying, and the scholars are saying? They say, no, we no longer want to be the periphery and the continent of Africa, the motherland, the hinterland, the epicenter. We are now asking for equality in relations between the continent of Africa and the Caribbean, even though we know we stem from Africa. We're going to move away from monologues, where a Landsberg stands in the class and he is the one with the knowledge, and assume that the students walk in the class without knowledge. The moment the student enters the class, the student already possesses knowledge. So we're going to move away from monologues to multilogues. And we're going to build on the knowledge that the students already possess. Let me now come to the challenge, where I think I can make a very modest contribution. And here I would particularly like to challenge the students, and I'm certainly looking forward to the interchange and the exchange of ideas as the morning unfolds. I suggest to you that one of the downsides of the very well planned, significant contribution that the students have made since the fateful summer of 2015 to now, but particularly the summer of 2015, when they caught the management and the executives and the academe off guard with their demands for fee-free, decolonized higher education. You've made tremendous inroads, and you should claim your victories. But I would like to hasten to add that a notion that struggle and protests started in 2015, I think, is misplaced. And we're gonna have to be careful not to be ahistorical, anti-historical, and anti-intellectual by pretending that everything that came before is not significant, not even 1976. So I want to suggest to you that one of the downsides that we have to be watch out for as we move into the future, coming to the second part of my talk of how do we, excuse this crude phrase, capitalize, build on the breakthroughs that the generation of 2014, 2015, 2016 made to higher education. How do we capitalize on that? I suggest to you there are some downsides we have to watch out for. One of the downsides is that at the moment, the student leadership and the student core from this generation is demanding so much power without responsibility that there is a risk that the balance might tilt totally the other side, where students no longer have responsibilities. The professoriate must now account to the students, and no longer will the professoriate also demand accountability. I would be the first to say that for too long it was one-sided and tilted the other way, where the professoriate had too much power and the students simply had to execute what was demanded from them. But I think we have to be careful that the pendulum doesn't swing the other way now. What I'm therefore going to advocate for and put on the agenda is a paradigm of partnership, a paradigm of equality, a paradigm of mutual responsibility, where both students and the academics have responsibilities. Remember, I didn't start with rights. I start deliberately with responsibilities, because I do notice a tendency where we are very quick to demand our rights without evoking the responsibilities that goes with it. I'm sure that there are many academics in this room that are, find themselves engaged and involved in supervision. I know that our chair is in the process of wrapping up a very important part of her life, bringing that doctoral thesis to an end. So let me use an example there. How often, when the relationship between supervisor and student goes wrong, how often do you find that the student blames everything that went wrong in that relationship on the supervisor? He was never around, he travels too much, he doesn't respond to emails, he gives me bad supervision, he even sends me half a sentence responses to a full chapter. But there's no sense of responsibility. No, I didn't do anything wrong in this relationship. And the culture on the part of the supervisor, everything is to be blamed on the student. It's the student that doesn't respond to my commands, to my demands, right? We've become so used to, I'm the one with the power, I dish out the commands, and you have to listen and you have to carry out. But in this relationship, look out for mutual responsibility, mutual accountability, where both sides account to one another. Even a simple thing like sending to the student a very clear, detailed letter of admission in which you spell out the rules. So these are the rules. No. How often do we tell the student via telephone, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, you've been accepted. You just do it casually through a telephone conversation. Where is the basic paper trail that spells out mutual roles and responsibilities? What about the roles of faculties, of departments? How often, when it is the case that the student is right after all, do you find that the supervisor then now blames it on? No, it's the faculty. No, it's somebody in the faculty. That's where it went wrong. So things are not codified. Rules are not clearly spelled out. I'm cautioning colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm cautioning against a pendulum swing where in the past the professoriate and the examiner and the supervisor and the lecturer had so much power that the student had almost nothing, to a pendulum swing where the students now have all the rights and the power, and the academics and the academe find themselves totally disempowered. Then I want to talk thirdly about this thing called, again to borrow a wonderful phrase from our discipline, that of diplomacy. Prof, and I think you'll like this one. What is the esprit de corps? What is the spirit of the corps, of the corps in your organization? Whether it's in VUT as a broad organization, whether it's in your unit, Dr. Machika, whether it's in your department, whether it's in that small unit of yours, whether it's in your research unit, whether it's in the human resource division of the university, whether it's in the finance division of the university, what is the esprit, the spirit of the corps? What, in a nutshell, is the culture? Is there a culture of neglect? Is there a culture of blame? Is there a culture of not taking responsibility? Or is there a culture of mutual responsibility, mutual accountability, and mutual embrace, where we embrace one another and remind ourselves again, even the finance division, even the HR division, that without students, there cannot be this thing called the university. When are we going to bring the student back in and place the student at the epicenter of everything that we do? Instead of ticking all the boxes, yet we treat the student as an afterthought. It's a client that we'll serve when there's extra time left. Everything else is important except that. Then I want to talk about the culture of implementation. I want to say something to you here. When overseas delegations come to this country, Vietnam, Singapore, wherever, they refer to us as the policy capital of the world. Man, we make policies and we pass procedures and we sit in senates and councils and we adopt policies. We suffer from planitis. We plan and we replan and we plan again, and then at the next meeting we just make sure that what we didn't finish planning we continue to plan. and we plan. But very little emphasis is placed on implementation. Simple thing called implementation. Now, let me give you two graphic examples, including one from students. So yes, I know Prof is sitting here thinking, is this the proverbial calm before the storm around the president's long-awaited report? But before we want to say too much bad about NSFAS, the National Students Aid Financial Scheme, those students that did get a reprieve and were exonerated from paying fees, even registration fees, then gets given a card and a certain amount of money is put in the card where you can pay for your books and everything. Do you know if you go from university to university, and I'm sure that VUT is not an exception, how many students even go and pick up these cards, yet those very students go to bed tonight without a proper meal and a warm meal that they've eaten. But all those cards filled with money lying in the administration office. So it's not just the administrative office that is bad at implementation. Even the students don't follow up on the very things that they have demanded. What I'm suggesting to you here, yes, rules are important, policies are important, procedures are important, but we all have to get into a culture of implementation. Some of us are in the business of supervision, and sometimes I say, it's not clear whether we are supervisors or super editors. There's a very fine line if you are in this business. But here is the point that I'm driving at. The few entities within our universities that are excelling at placing the student at the heart of everything we do, sometimes find that when that culture of excellence exists, where we want to serve, it's almost as if a culture creeps in where the student believes that he or she should send substandard work because, you know why? There is somebody else who's going to correct it. And there is somebody else who will make sure it comes out well and it comes out perfect. I'm not taking my eye off the ball here. Mutual accountability and mutual responsibility. Man, do we do, Dr. Machika, I feel for you, do we do evaluations at universities? We evaluate and we re-evaluate and we self-evaluate. And then what happens with these evaluations? For those of you who've gone through evaluations, and I'm sure VUT has had its famous, its share of evaluations. So you write a huge, thick evaluation report about the quality of the work that you do, and of course, the tendency is to sing your own praises. And what do the evaluators do? They simply take that self-evaluation report and they simply edit it down with a few critical comments, and there is your evaluation report. But what about taking the idea of self-evaluation very seriously? As student, as lecturer, as senior director, as executive director, as deputy vice chancellor, as vice chancellor, indeed as chancellor of the university. Why don't we place more of the emphasis on the self? Let me now therefore draw to a close by suggesting something. I think we have to move towards codes of mutual conduct, codes of mutual responsibility. You know, it's very sad that one of the mantras I live my life by, and it's not necessarily something I'm proud of, because it's not supposed to be that way, Prof, I suggest, is that people don't do what you expect. They do what you inspect. Listen carefully. People don't do what you expect, but they do what is constantly inspected. So one's big brother, yeah, and invariably it's big brother, eh? There are not very many big sisters around, right? Because it's so patriarchal, and so much of the power still lies with the dominant male figure in the world, in the world of work. But when there's the helicopter phenomenon, you hover over your children at home, over your students, over those who report to you at work, then there's a sense, we believe, that things get done. And we suffer from this idea that when I'm not around, things will fall apart, things will fall in place. Well, they will fall in place if you did not reinforce rules, systems, regulations, and above all, trust, where we can trust each other. That I don't have to be there in order for you to do your work. You know, for students I say, you know what's the toughest part about writing? Is when you're on your own. And studying is when you're on your own, nobody is around, you don't have to impress anybody, there's not 9 others you can impress by, they can see I'm busy studying. It's when you're on your own, nobody else around, and you have to do it. But why don't we get out of this culture that people don't do what you expect, they rather do what you inspect? Why don't we move away from a culture of having to inspect everything and move towards trust? So I conclude with what I modestly call a code of mutual conduct between those who have a bit of power and those who reports to the powerful. And why don't we embrace not the consultative leader, not the democratic leader, certainly not the big man leader. It's very interesting when the chair introduced me and overly introduced me. Who would have thought that Uncle Bob next door, that his end would come in this manner? Man, please don't quote me on this one, but if ever there was a textbook coup d'etat, this was textbook, hey? You just say, no, we're just after criminals. We're just looking for criminals around the president. Seamlessly done. We all thought we're going to the conference next week, 2 weeks from now, and he will be endorsed again. He's beyond an octogenarian. He's already 94 years old. And in Zimbabwe, proud Zimbabwe of all places, comes the army and just makes the announcement. So I'm certainly not here to embrace the big man of Africa leadership syndrome. I'm not even here to embrace, given that this is the year in which, as South Africans, we celebrate one of the iconic figures of the liberation movement, the servant leadership style of O.R. Tambo. I'm certainly not here advocating for the militaristic, militant leadership style of the Groot Crocodile, P.W. Botha. So whatever leadership style you believe in, it's not about that. I think we have to move towards a new and emerging leadership style that has been written off, and it's called critical leadership, where the relationship between the leader or leaders and so-called followers is one of constant sharing, democratic decision-making, consensus building, and taking joint responsibility for the outcome, however good or bad. So I conclude with what I call a code of mutual responsibility and conduct. Code 1, why can't we embrace as student, as lecturer, as senior director, as director, as tutor, as vice chancellor, as deputy vice chancellor? Why can't we embrace a conduct that says rule number 1 is to honor everyone's human dignity? Everyone's. Rule 2, can we become more inclusive? You know, in the age of fees must fall, and the age of fee-free tertiary education, when the students rightly assert themselves. It's interesting, eh? What the students, listen carefully, those of you who are 47 and older, I don't know how I picked on 47. I'm just too scared to say 50. You know, it's a sort of it's a midlife crisis thing. But isn't it interesting? Listen to the students of 2014, 15, and 16. Whereas we grew up, Dr. Machika, being told about the class project of 1996. They refer to what we did in 1994 in Empress Palace there near the airport. They refer to it as the 94 project. When somebody calls something a project, what they mean is you effectively took a gamble at a gambling house, Empress Palace. So what they're saying to us, you sort out that problem. We didn't create that problem. We have our own problems. Our problems is free tertiary education, equality, that's what they demand. But what suffers in the process is a culture of inclusivity. It's interesting to forget how pluralistic we are. Remember, I started by talking about the pluriversal world. Just look next to you at your table. Just look at how inclusive, how pluralistic we are. Young, old, black, white, professor, student, administrator, boss, supervisor. So where is rule number 2? The culture of inclusivity. Then, man, this is an interesting one. Be aware of others. Learn to speak kindly, and above all, listen a bit. Isn't it interesting how listening can be a virtue? We all have something to say, and we all believe that what we have to say is more important than what the next person has to say, what the professor has to say, what the student has to say. But what about listening attentively? Have you looked at that leaders? But there's something interesting about the leader that we're celebrating this year. I was privileged, Prof, last week to be part of a panel in the Department of International Relations where we honored the leadership and contribution of Oliver Tambo. Many of you might not know, but Oliver Tambo never accepted any honorary doctorate, any award by any country, any organization. Every time he is nominated, he nominates somebody who reports to him or younger or in a less powerful position in his organization. He never sought the limelight. He never sought the credit. He never sought the recognition. And he always listened and spoke lastly, right? But just listen attentively. How difficult is it to give praise? How often do we give praise? And how difficult is it sometimes to accept praise? 4th rule. 5, Respect people's boundaries and affirm your own boundaries. Set boundaries for yourself. Make teaching safe and welcoming as opposed to alienating spaces. Make teaching, this business that we are in, welcoming, safe spaces. Respect the norms of dialogues and multilogues. Because even the word dialogue that we overuse, means two. You don't get a monologue where there's only one person speaking. You get a dialogue, it's only two. But what about multilogues? 8, accept, give, and actualize constructive criticism. Criticism is there to build us up. It's the manner in which we give the criticism. But geez, these days we are so thin-skinned, we can't even take criticism. Second to last one, accept responsibility and apologize when necessary. Take responsibility. And last but by no means least, be an agent of your own teaching and learning. You be the agent of your teaching and learning. So, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great privilege to be here. I end where I started by making a prediction for you. When the dust goes and settles, and I don't think the dust is going to settle soon, on whether it should be fee-free or not, and whether we can afford it or not. And when the dust goes and settles on what constitutes decolonized education, I think the long game that we're in for is the changing nature of the relationship between the professoriate and the student. Put crudely, it's a changing nature of those who held power before and those who demand power now. And can we meet each other and share critically a space of co-governance, co-responsibility, and learning from one another? I thank you.